Imagine it's the year 2000. SquareSoft is at the absolute peak of their powers and their dominance. Final Fantasy's pretty much untouchable. They are the kings of the genre. And if you see that SquareSoft logo on a box, you assume you're about to play an instant classic. And then they drop The Bouncer. It's a game that looks and was marketed as this next-gen cinematic action masterpiece, only to become one of the most infamous, wait, that's it, games of the early PS2 era. So today I kind of want to show you guys what The Bouncer is, what it was trying to be, and basically why it failed so hard that it basically became Square's biggest L ever. And this all happened during their peak golden age. Look, to be clear, The Bouncer isn't some random bargain bin, game from a struggling studio. This was SquareSoft. This one hits different. It was the golden age. It was right before the PS2 era really exploded. They're hot off the heels of the PlayStation 1, Super Nintendo, and SquareSoft wasn't just some big company. They were the company. They basically, during this time, they had that anything they touch turns to gold aura farming going on. And when this game launched, it didn't launch like some normal beat 'em up game. It launched like an event. It was one of those games that people looked and they thought, okay, so this PS2 era that is so hyped up, it's finally here. The future is here, and we were looking to The Bouncer to kind of hold our hands and walk us into the PS2 era. And The Bouncer did deliver visually. The problem was, once you actually started playing it, you realized something very important. It definitely looked like a next-gen game, but it didn't feel next-gen.
But wait, there's more.
All right, so quick synopsis, so you're not too lost. In The Bouncer, you play as Scion, who was, yes, a bouncer, literally working at a bar called Fate in the city of Yokohama. And very early on, the plot kind of kicks in when a woman named Dominique gets kidnapped. And from there, the story escalates into this weird mixture of street gangs and corporate corruption, big experiments, and government kind of conspiracy energy. And honestly, to me, on paper, that's not even a bad setup. It actually sounds pretty cool. It's kind of like SquareSoft was trying to blend this anime crime drama with this sci-fi conspiracy and beat 'em up action arcade kind of gameplay. You build a team, you fight your way through waves of enemies, and the story kind of unfolds in between the fights like a playable action movie kind of. Which brings us to the most important part. The Bouncer didn't fail because the story was the worst thing in the world, or that the idea was terrible. It failed because the execution was just a perfect storm of crappy issues. Here's what The Bouncer was marketed as: a cinematic, story-driven, high-budget action game that felt like the PS2's coming out party, the PS2's showing off party. It was flexing, and you can tell. The cutscenes, the presentation, definitely the music and the vibe, it genuinely looked like Square wanted to prove that they could do more than just RPGs. They can do anything. But they leaned way too hard into this kind of movie aspect and not enough into the video game, gameplay aspect, which is the reason we play video games. And GameSpot, this review from GameSpot definitely sums it up perfectly and brutally. It's one of the best looking games ever made that can be finished every possible way in 3 or 4 hours. And that sentence was basically The Bouncer's tombstone. Yes, 3 to 4 hours. This is a game that you could buy after school and you could finish it by the time your dinner was ready that night. Okay, let's get into the actual reasons why it failed. Number 1. The hype was way bigger than the actual game. For me, this is the number 1 reason. People didn't buy The Bouncer expecting a short side quest brawler, basically. I played side quests and Elder Scrolls that lasted longer than this game. They bought it expecting the next SquareSoft obsession. When you're SquareSoft and you're at your peak, and maybe that expectation isn't fair, but you created that expectation. When players popped this in, they were ready for like depth and unlocks and story twists and multiple character arcs and maybe even some RPG systems. We know it was a beat 'em up, but that's what we were expecting. Instead, what we got was a very simple beat 'em up, a very, very, very short campaign, and a super repetitive combat loop. So the disappointment wasn't just about the quality, it was about this mismatch between what we were expecting and what we actually got. And number two, which I just kind of mentioned, the game is like criminally short. Because this is the one thing that when I look back on it, a lot of people mentioned the most. The Bouncer became infamous because it was something that people realized they paid full price for and they beat it in a single sitting. Like I said, 3 to 4 max, 5. They couldn't even double that. They couldn't make it 10. And in the year 2000, 2001, a game being short wasn't just this small flaw, especially a game being short from SquareSoft. It was a fatal flaw. Because when you have SquareSoft on the box, people were trained to expect long, epic games. And the Bouncer basically says, okay, you've seen the whole thing. Thank you for, the money. And then the credits rolled. And then it boots you back to the menu. That's not a flaw. It's basically like the biggest anime betrayal ever. I'm not saying the Bouncer had to be like this 60-hour epic beat 'em up game. Could it be 10 hours? 12 hours? And you got to remember, a lot of the game was just cutscenes. It was basically cutscenes with beat 'em up filler in between the cutscenes. Now, reason number 3, the gameplay depth just wasn't there. If you're going to have a 3 to 4 hour game, the gameplay better be damn near perfect. Beat 'em ups live and die on the way the combat feels, the kind of like the combos and the satisfaction of hitting combos, the variety of enemies and gameplay styles, meaningful difficulty curves, enemies that force you to adapt. And the Bouncer has some cool moves, it really does, but it's definitely not deep enough to carry the game on its own, especially with such a short runtime. So once wow, look at these PS2 graphics, once that kind of feeling starts to fade away, basically what you're left with is repeating fights, literally. Simple, very simple button mashing strategy and no evolution to gameplay. Well, very little evolution to the gameplay. And when combat is your main gameplay, this is a beat 'em up game. It wasn't a JRPG. It's a beat 'em up game. That is a huge, huge problem. Reason number 4, the game was style first and substance second. The game's honestly one of the best examples of a lot of early PS2 game priorities because, at the time there was a lot of look what the PS2 can do. We're just showing off the graphics, and the Bouncer definitely delivered that. But it also feels like a game that was built backwards because they kind of it was visuals first and then the cutscenes and then the vibe. And it's like they just tacked on the gameplay last, basically, which is why the pacing feels so weird and it feels so off, especially if you remember playing it. And if you don't remember playing it, go look at some, people playing it online. It's really strange the way it's put together. It feels like an interactive movie, except the interaction isn't even interesting. And the movie is kind of mid at best. Reason number 5, the tone is peak 2000s, kind of like this awkward, cool guy energy. The Bouncer is such a product of its time. And it doesn't feel timeless in that sense because 9, you can pick it up today and it's still great. Even 8, who does have this protagonist that is kind of like this moody, cool guy, but awkward and weird, and even that holds up today. But the Bouncer has that vibe of everybody's this tough guy. Everybody is overly serious. Everything is like super edgy, but not that edgy. Everyone looks like they're kind of like in this 2000s boy band kind of. And look, it is charming in like this time capsule kind of way because it does encapsulate that time, the very early 2000s. But at the time, it didn't really land the way they probably hoped. And by they, I mean SquareSoft. It was trying to be like way too cool. But sometimes it definitely kind of veered into this like parody, unintentional comedy, which actually does make it kind of fun to kind of go back and look at it today. But if they had had a story arc like 8, like Squall did, it would have hit way, way harder. But instead, the characters were all like super, I wouldn't even call them 2-dimensional. They were like 1-dimensional characters. Reason number 6, the launch window trap. Because early PS2 games were weird. Some were like ambitious, some were experimental. A lot of them felt really unfinished. Studios were learning this new PlayStation 2 tech, like how to put 1,000 ducks into a bathtub. And the demand for next-gen content was insane. The Bouncer feels like a game that exists because SquareSoft wanted to just have a big PS2 presence like early on. It wanted to just show off the visuals and get a kind of like a movie game out there. So they shipped something that honestly probably could have used like another year or two in development. And then we get to kind of like the sales, right? It sold like adding everything up from the very reliable BG charts to like, like Wikipedia. It basically sold about 1 million copies worldwide, which doesn't sound like super terrible in a vacuum, especially for 2000 when hitting like 1 million in sales was considered pretty good. But the real issue is context because, like I've said 1,000 times, this is SquareSoft at their peak. This is a hyped PS2 showpiece title. It should have been a breakout success. Instead, it ended up with the reputation of this game that you just beat in an afternoon and you regret paying full price for it. You should have just rented it from Blockbuster, which is arguably worse than just being a bad game because you feel like you got scammed out of your money. So, to wrap up, this is why The Bouncer is Square's biggest L, because it's not like, it wasn't like the worst game ever. It wasn't broken, you know what I mean? But because it came from this high profile misread of the moment, SquareSoft, at this time, they had the power to do anything. And they spent it on a short, shallow brawler that looked good, but it left people feeling ripped off. It's a perfect example of a company learning painfully that visuals don't equal longevity, that cinematic does not equal fun. Please, game industry, can you actually write that one down? Cinematics do not equal fun. That's very important. And your brand can definitely work against you if the product that you're throwing out there doesn't match what people's expectations are from your company. So let me know in the comments, did you play The Bouncer back in the day? I want to know, did you love it? Do you have good memories of it? And if you didn't play it, go look at some like gameplay on YouTube and tell me, does this feel like a game that you would want to play? Or does it still feel like Square's biggest L? Let me know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe. Have an amazing day, and God bless.